The silence in the war room was unlike anything these men had ever known. Moments before, the air was thick with smoke and tense whispers. A chessboard of admirals and strategists, men who believed they had seen every twist that war could offer. Now, every head was bowed, every eye trained on the trembling radio operator who could barely force the words out. The line crackled, desperate voices leaking into the room. In a remote corner of the Pacific, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, their supercarrier, was gone. No one moved. It was as if the ocean itself had swallowed the room. Reports filtered in with the stench of disbelief. Flames licking across a twisted flight deck, men leaping into oil-slicked waters, the carrier's flag vanishing beneath a column of black smoke. For years, they had called this ship invincible, a floating fortress immune to torpedoes, the crowning achievement of Japanese engineering and wartime ambition. Its disappearance was unthinkable, as if the sun had vanished from the sky. Admiral Yamaguchi, the architect of this armada, stared at his trembling hands. All around him, faces hardened by decades at sea betrayed the same truth. They had placed their faith in steel and myth, and in a single shattering moment, both had failed. Every radio in the fleet erupted with confusion and denial. Impossible. She cannot be lost. Not her. But the reality was unmistakable, scrawled across every urgent dispatch and panicked voice. Out on the water, drifting survivors watched their world disappear. The sea was littered with the burning wreckage of dreams, aircraft torn apart, banners half submerged, the once mighty silhouette sinking quietly into the abyss. Rescue crews moved like ghosts, searching for answers that no one dared speak aloud. On distant shorelines, families waited for news, clinging to hope as rumors raced ahead of the truth. Back in the war room, one simple, shattering question echoed among the stunned commanders. What weapon could possibly have done this? How could the mightiest ship in their empire vanish in a single day? The answers lay not in the ruins, but in the choices made long before the first bomb fell. A story of vision, pride, and a fatal flaw hidden beneath the armor. Long before the fire and the panic, before the world's strongest ship became just another ghost on the ocean floor, there was a dream, a vision born not of caution, but of unshakable belief. And as the silence lingered, history beckoned the men in that room to remember where it all began. In the dark heart of Kure Naval Arsenal, behind thick curtains of secrecy, a new kind of warship took shape, one that would make legends obsolete. Engineers hunched over blueprints late into the night, pencils flying, hands stained with oil and hope. Outside, cranes swung across floodlit docks, moving vast sheets of armor plate, each one welded with the promise of victory. The supercarrier would not just join the fleet, it would change the game. At its core, the project was an answer to fear. Reports filtered in from across the Pacific. American yards turning out carriers with breathtaking speed. Fleets swelling like a rising tide. The Imperial Navy could not match the Allies ship for ship, but perhaps, the admirals reasoned, one perfect vessel could turn the tide. And so the design teams doubled down. This carrier would dwarf anything that came before. Longer than 2 football fields, taller than a city hall, she bristled with anti-aircraft guns and boasted an air wing that could blot out the sun. Yet as hull sections rose from the slipway, the mood was not simply technical, it was electric. Word spread among workers and officers alike. This would be the warship to restore the nation's honor. Veterans who remembered the sting of Midway watched as the bow took shape, hands behind their backs, eyes shining with a mixture of pride and yearning. They whispered about her speed, her armor, unmatched, impenetrable, and the way she seemed to challenge fate itself. Inside the design bureau, Commander Okada and his team debated every detail. Should the hangar decks run double height to allow for larger bombers? Would the new armor scheme render her torpedo-proof? Okada argued for more planes, more fuel. He could see a future where the ship struck from thousands of miles away, untouchable. But deadlines pressed hard. The war would not wait. Corners were trimmed, and sometimes so were the safety margins. As the carrier's hull grew, so too did her shadow. By launch day, the whole city turned out. Banners fluttered, schoolchildren waved paper flags, and dignitaries gathered to witness history. A brass band played as the massive hull eased into the water, and for a moment, even the most cynical among them felt the rush of something bigger than themselves. Cameras clicked. Newspapers hailed the ship as the pride of the empire. Mothers pointed to the carrier and whispered to their sons, "Someday, you'll serve on her deck." The vessel herself was a marvel. Her flight deck stretched longer than any runway in Japan. Below, thick belts of armor hugged the waterline, and deep inside, state-of-the-art engines promised speeds no enemy could match. The officers who would command her walked the deck in silence, their faces taut with the burden of history. This was more than steel and rivets. This was redemption. But for all the fanfare and celebration, not everyone was convinced. Some senior engineers, those who remembered the disasters of earlier years, watched with wary eyes. They knew that every leap forward demanded a price. Some compromises, buried deep in the ship's blueprints, gnawed at them. The ventilation in the hangar decks, the arrangement of the fuel lines, the extra weight of added guns that pressed the ship ever lower in the water. Still, as the sun set over the shipyard, the crowds chanted her name, and the papers ran bold headlines. Unsinkable! Invincible! The Empire's answer to fate. In the officers' mess that evening, toasts rang out, glasses clinking with bravado. The supercarrier was more than a ship. She was a promise, a myth, a line in the sand that no enemy would ever cross. Yet beneath the layers of steel, celebration, and national pride, hidden weaknesses began to take root. Small choices, invisible to the cheering crowds, would one day matter. But for now, the supercarrier was afloat, gleaming under the moonlight, a monument to belief, and to the arrogance that sometimes walks in its shadow. The next morning, before the city had even fully awoken, the ship's sirens wailed. Crews raced aboard, pilots took their stations, and the carrier prepared to sail. As her bow broke through the gentle harbor waves, the entire nation watched, breathless, believing they were witnessing the dawn of a new era. The pride of the empire was on the move, and nothing, it seemed, could stop her. The supercarrier's departure from Kure was nothing short of a national spectacle. Wharves and rooftops overflowed with families, waving white kerchiefs and clutching hand-painted signs. The deep thrum of engines echoed across the bay, a sound as reassuring as a heartbeat. Bands struck up martial tunes as the ship, gleaming and vast, glided through the water, trailing confetti and cheers in her wake. Newspapers called it the day hope set sail, and for a brief, golden moment, that's exactly what it felt like. Aboard the carrier, the atmosphere was a mix of excitement and nervous pride. Young sailors pressed against the rails, watching the coastline recede, each secretly wondering if this ship would carry them home as heroes. Officers barked orders with the crisp precision that comes from years of practice, their eyes betraying a hint of awe at the sheer scale of the floating city beneath their feet. In the crowded galley, crew members traded stories and laughter, betting cigarettes on which pilot would be the first to launch from the new flight deck. Below, in the engine rooms, sweat-soaked mechanics whispered superstitions, fingers crossed for good fortune. Across Japan, the carrier's every move became headline news. Propaganda posters plastered city walls, promising victory through innovation and resolve. Children built model ships in classrooms, reciting the carrier's name like a prayer. In cramped Tokyo apartments, mothers kept radios close, hearts swelling with pride as broadcasts described their son's new home as a fortress above the waves. The ship was more than a weapon. It was a symbol, a reassurance that Japan could still shape its own fate. Reporters swarmed the dock before every departure, eager to interview officers and lucky enlisted men. Some of those voices still echo in faded recordings. "My boy is serving on the Pride of the Navy," one mother boasted, clutching a creased photo. "He writes that you can see the horizon from every deck." "The engines hum like thunder," a pilot said, eyes shining. "You feel invincible up there, as if nothing in the world can touch you." The ship's first missions were parades of power. Training drills were staged for the cameras, rows of Zero fighters leaping skyward, anti-aircraft crews swinging into action, officers inspecting spotless gun emplacements. Each maneuver was carefully choreographed, meant to awe both friend and foe. The carrier's silhouette became a fixture in newsreels, cutting through storms, launching planes by moonlight, a defiant answer to every setback Japan had suffered. For a while, nothing seemed impossible. The officers dined in gleaming salons, toasting to future victories, while below decks, sailors sang songs that blended bravado with genuine hope. Old wounds, scars from Midway, and the Solomons seemed to heal in the presence of this new legend. When the ship returned to port, her crew were greeted like celebrities, paraded through city streets, showered with gifts and thanks. But far beyond the reach of Japanese radio, something else was stirring. In dimly lit rooms across the Pacific, Allied analysts scrutinized grainy photographs and intercepted transmissions, their curiosity piqued by rumors of a colossal new warship. Intelligence reports piled up, coded messages hinting that the balance of power was shifting. The supercarrier's fame, so carefully constructed at home, was now making waves among enemies who specialized in turning myths into targets. In that brief, shining season, the crew and their families lived in a kind of suspended disbelief, their fears and doubts washed away by pride. Yet, as the carrier sailed further from home, across waters already haunted by unseen eyes, the seeds of a new contest were quietly being sown. Unknown to those aboard, a threat was gathering, watchful, patient, and ready to test the limits of legend. The pride of a nation was on display, but just over the horizon, an enemy was preparing to challenge everything they believed unbreakable. In distant offices, half a world away, Allied commanders gathered around tables littered with intercepted transmissions and photographs so grainy they were more rumor than proof. The whispers of a Japanese supercarrier had trickled in on the currents of war, first as vague intelligence, then as a pattern too bold to ignore. Admirals peered at maps crawling with red markers. The Pacific transformed from an abstract chessboard into a living, breathing adversary. They knew, even before the ink dried on their reports, that something new and dangerous was loose on the ocean. In cramped back rooms from Pearl Harbor to Brisbane, men and women bent over typewriters and stacks of code sheets, the hum of radio static their constant companion. Code breakers sweated in tropical heat, cursing the stubborn riddles of Japanese naval ciphers. Every decrypted fragment was pieced together with the next: coordinates, weather reports, the odd mention of Kido Butai, and now, more ominously, the name of the new ship whispered with a kind of reverence. The Allies sensed a shift, but the scope remained maddeningly unclear. On the water, American and British submarines stalked the sea lanes, periscopes slicing through spray and shadow. The crews endured endless hours submerged, engines whispering, hearts hammering at every distant sonar ping. More than once, a lookout caught a glimpse of an impossibly vast silhouette on the horizon, a shape that didn't match any ship in the Allied registry. Reports of the carrier's size and speed became the stuff of legend among submariners, a ghost ship both feared and sought. Aerial reconnaissance crews risked everything for a single photograph. Pilots flew so low that salt crusted their cockpits, banking hard to avoid roving Zero fighters. One by one, they brought back snapshots, the faint smudge of a flight deck, the telltale shadow of a hangar door flung wide. Intelligence officers squinted through magnifying glasses, measuring the length of a ship that should not have been possible, debating whether the rumors were just clever Japanese deception. Still, the evidence mounted, and so did the anxiety. Within the war rooms, tension sharpened to a point. Allied admirals, haunted by memories of Pearl Harbor and humbled by every surprise Japan had dealt them, debated fiercely. Some advocated caution, avoid direct confrontation, bleed the enemy dry. Others argued that allowing such a vessel to roam free would be an invitation to disaster. What if the carrier struck Australia? What if she led an attack on the supply lines to India? In the smoke-filled air of the strategy rooms, the pressure mounted with each passing hour. Shadowy figures, never named in any official report, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Double agents slipped through bustling ports, passing whispers and code numbers, sometimes at the risk of their lives. Cryptographers cross-checked enemy transmissions, searching for the code word that would confirm their worst fears. A breakthrough, when it came, was almost accidental. A slip in an enemy broadcast, a pattern in the traffic analysis, a careless boast in a captured diary. Suddenly, the Allies understood. The supercarrier was not just real, she was nearly operational. That realization sent a shudder through every level of command. Plans were rewritten in haste. Orders were relayed by secure line to every submarine and scout plane in range. Track the carrier. Find her. Don't let her disappear. Out at sea, new patrol grids blossomed on charts, each one a silent promise of confrontation. The eyes of an empire, and those of her enemies, now fixed on a single point in the vastness of the Pacific. The Allies had caught the scent of something monumental, a prize too dangerous to ignore. What they would uncover next had the power to upend not just the Japanese plan for victory, but the entire balance of the war at sea. The gathering storm was about to break, and nothing would be the same again. In a smoky, dim-lit command tent on a Pacific atoll, Allied strategists pored over maps and message boards, redrawing lines for the 100th time. Their nerves were raw. Stakes had never been higher. They had uncovered the truth of the Japanese supercarrier, and now every heartbeat of the war seemed to hinge on whether they could turn knowledge into action. What followed was a chess game played in the dark, a campaign of shadows, silence, and nerves stretched thin. The Allies' plan was bold, bordering on reckless. Codebreakers had traced the carrier's projected route, catching fragments in enemy broadcasts and aligning them with the carrier's last known sightings. But getting close was another matter. If the Japanese suspected even a hint of a trap, they would melt into the vast Pacific and vanish. So the Allies set out to mislead. False radio chatter flooded the airwaves. American ships, far from the target zone, transmitted scripted conversations about invented convoys and phantom squadrons. Decoy fleets steamed in the wrong direction, launching aircraft on pointless patrols, playing their part in the greatest misdirection the theater had yet seen. Messages were leaked through double agents, carefully crafted to suggest that Allied focus lay far from the carrier's real course. The hope was simple: make the Japanese overconfident, make them chase a mirage. Tension crackled in every planning room. Senior officers watched the clock, knowing that every hour increased the risk of discovery. In the shadows, codebreakers sweated over typewriters, hands cramped from decoding endless reels of intercepted messages. They listened for a single phrase, a slip that would confirm the Japanese had swallowed the bait. When that moment finally came, a coded reference to the supercarrier altering course, falling straight into the Allies' killing zone, a collective exhale swept through the command staff. But no one allowed themselves to celebrate. Too much depended on variables out of their control. The air crews who would strike the first blow spent sleepless nights in tented camps, pacing among their aircraft, reviewing every line of the plan. They listened as their commanders briefed them on the carrier's rumored defenses, the speed and reach of her fighters, the near-mythic power of her guns. Some pilots scrawled last letters to loved ones, tucking them into flight suits alongside lucky coins and worn photographs. The final gamble was a weapon still in its infancy, a new kind of torpedo, modified in frantic weeks by teams of engineers back in California and Pearl. It was heavier, faster, and, if it worked, capable of punching through even the thickest armored belt. The pilots practiced endlessly with dummy runs, nerves frayed by the knowledge that in battle there would be no second chances. The very weapon designed to sink the unsinkable had never been fired in combat before. If it failed, the trap would spring shut on its own architects. Allied submarines fanned out in silent pickets, waiting to confirm the enemy's approach. Up above, reconnaissance planes buzzed, engines rattling as they searched for the telltale outline of the Japanese task force. In war rooms and cockpits alike, the sense of anticipation was electric, every mind teetering between hope and dread. Could deception and technology really bring down the greatest ship ever built? Or would the Allies' boldness doom them all? As the final orders went out and the sea filled with silent hunters, both fleets edged closer under cover of darkness. In the carrier's wardroom, Japanese officers celebrated their expected triumph, unaware of the net closing around them. Across the ocean, Allied pilots stared out into the night, waiting for the signal that would launch them into history. The trap was set. Now, two navies hurtled toward each other, every man, every weapon, every secret bet on a single untested chance. The Battle of Legends was about to begin. At dawn, the sky above the Pacific was a bruised tapestry of cloud and flame. The two fleets moved with silent urgency, drawn toward each other as if by destiny. Aboard the Japanese supercarrier, the day began with routine. Pilots checking gear, officers sipping strong tea, the air charged but confident. The admiral on deck watched the horizon, every inch the image of composure. He believed the legends that had sprung up around his ship, that she was the fortress no enemy could breach, the dragon no spear could slay. The calm shattered with a rising whine. From the eastern edge of the sky came dots that quickly grew into angry swarms. Allied bombers, bristling with ordnance, flanked by fighters darting like swallows. Alarm bells clanged. Pilots raced to their aircraft. Crews manned anti-aircraft guns, and a flurry of orders echoed across the decks. Within minutes, the airspace above the carrier was alive with chaos. Flak bursts stitched the clouds, black puffs marking near misses and hopes for lucky hits. The first wave dove hard, engines screaming, bombs tumbling earthward. The carrier's guns spat metal into the sky, and for a moment, it seemed like nothing could touch her. Torpedoes were spotted and evaded with practiced turns. Bombs scored only glancing blows, bouncing off armor that had been over-engineered for this very day. Reports from below decks were almost boastful. "Minimal damage, sir. No penetrations." The flight deck, scraped and scorched, remained operational. Deck crews cleared debris with the cold focus of men who had rehearsed disaster 1,000 times. Above the fray, Japanese Zeros tangled with Allied fighters in a series of dizzying dogfights. The sky became a spinning tableau of contrails and fireballs, machine gun tracers arcing through clouds. Veteran American pilots tried to punch through to the carrier, but most were forced to break away, some spiraling into the sea below. The defenders cheered each downed enemy, hearts swelling with the illusion of invincibility. Inside the command center, the mood began to shift. Initial anxiety faded, replaced by a growing sense of triumph. The admiral received update after update. Damage reports minimal, air groups intact, enemy losses mounting. A junior officer allowed himself a smile. "They cannot touch us," he whispered. and the words seemed to take on the weight of prophecy. As the morning wore on, the attacks did not relent. Allied bombers returned in waves, each strike more desperate than the last. Yet again, the carrier absorbed punishment and returned fire with merciless efficiency. Flames leapt up from a near miss, quickly extinguished by disciplined crew. A torpedo exploded close by, sending up a tower of water, but leaving the hull untouched. Above and below decks, men began to believe their own myth. The supercarrier was truly unsinkable. Allied commanders, watching from distant ships, felt hope slipping away. Losses mounted. Their newest weapon, the much-hyped torpedo, had struck home only to detonate prematurely, damage minimal. "She shrugs them off," one pilot radioed, voice tight with fatigue. "She's a fortress." For a moment, it seemed the gamble had failed. The legend would stand. But legends have a way of masking flaws. As smoke from the latest attack drifted across the deck, a sharp-eyed gunner noticed something odd. A patch of oil blooming on the water, a faint but unmistakable shimmer in the sunlight. Below decks, an engineer reported a vibration, minor but growing. In the rush of victory, these warnings were easy to overlook. Yet, for the men planning the next strike, these signals were everything. Allied intelligence pored over every fragment of intercepted communication, searching for any sign of vulnerability. A codebreaker caught a fleeting reference to a repair crew summoned to the hangar deck. Nothing dramatic, but the first crack in the ship's myth. And as the sky cleared and the battered Allied squadrons regrouped, a single thought gripped every pilot and planner. There must be a way in. Somewhere, hidden in all that armor and bravado, was a weakness waiting to be found. The next attack would not be just another barrage. It would be a desperate gamble, a test of human ingenuity against steel and certainty. Beneath the cheers and the boasts, beneath the fresh layers of smoke and hope, the tides were already turning. Unseen by those who believed themselves untouchable, the enemy was watching, learning, and preparing to strike where no one expected. The battle was far from over, and the story of the supercarrier was about to change forever. Lieutenant Jack Monroe could feel the sweat gathering inside his flight suit, every nerve screaming as his plane hugged the waves. He'd watched two of his squadron go down on the last run, engines coughing black smoke before vanishing into the boiling sea. Now, the plan had changed. Desperation had forced the brass to try something new, something Monroe's own instructors had called madness in training. The modified torpedoes slung under his wings were heavier, untested in battle, and their guidance was less than perfect. But there was no time for doubts. He throttled forward, eyes fixed on the distant speck that was the Japanese supercarrier. All around him, Allied pilots hunched over their controls, formations loose but determined. Radio silence. Every man had heard the latest reports. The carrier was taking everything they threw at her, the legend growing with every failed attack. Monroe gritted his teeth and dropped even lower, the nose of his plane skimming just above the waves. Flak erupted ahead, sudden and violent, black bursts tearing the air where he'd been a second before. He counted down in his head. 10 miles, 5, 3. The ship loomed now, impossibly massive, bristling with guns. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if the rumors were true. Was she really unsinkable? There was no time to ponder. He flicked the bomb bay switch, feeling the rumble as the new torpedo dropped free, trailing a silver line toward the hull. On the Japanese carrier, the mood had shifted from triumph to tension. Officers watched the new attack run with wary eyes, aware that the previous waves had been relentless. A petty officer shouted as the first torpedo hit the water, its angle different, lower, almost skimming. Seconds stretched as everyone braced. The torpedo struck, a dull thud echoing through the hull. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a deep, unnatural shudder rattled the decks. Monroe, banking hard to avoid the wall of anti-aircraft fire, saw the explosion blossom just below the ship's midsection, right at the waterline, where the armor had always been assumed to be thickest. But this new torpedo, with its altered running depth and beefed-up warhead, had found a blind spot. The blast sent a geyser of oil and steel skyward. Crewmen on deck were thrown off their feet. The flight deck, moments before buzzing with ordered activity, became a scene of chaos. Fires erupting, ammunition cook-offs rattling along the bow. On the American radios, disbelief crackled. "Direct hit! Repeat, direct hit!" Monroe's voice shook with something between triumph and shock. The carrier listed not much at first, but enough to send equipment skittering and fuel spilling into the ocean. Damage control parties rushed below decks, only to find that the blast had torn through compartments never meant to be breached. Seawater poured in, shorting electrical systems, flooding magazines, rendering whole sections of the mighty ship useless. Back on the bridge, Japanese officers struggled to process what they were seeing. For hours, their armor had made them feel immortal. Now, in a single devastating moment, they realized the truth. No ship was without weakness. The myth of invincibility shattered as sirens wailed and smoke choked the air. No one, Allied or Japanese, could quite believe what had just happened. Monroe circled once, long enough to see the carrier's list growing more pronounced. Rescue boats frantically deploying and flames crawling across the deck. As he turned for home, he heard the awed voices of his comrades, each man repeating what they'd witnessed, struggling to put history into words. Below, on the carrier's ravaged deck, chaos reigned. And as Monroe's plane faded into the distance, a new kind of terror took hold among the surviving crew. A realization that what had seemed unthinkable was now unstoppable, and the fight for survival was just beginning. The decks that had once echoed with discipline and purpose now roared with panic and pain. Smoke billowed from gaping wounds in the hull, swirling through twisted ladders and shattered hatches. Sirens wailed, first in command, then in desperation, as crewmen stumbled through corridors choked with fumes, calling out names that vanished in the roar. Every emergency protocol drilled into them now clashed with the raw chaos of the moment. Below the flight deck, teams of damage control rushed headlong into fire and darkness. Young sailors, faces streaked with oil and sweat, heaved hoses and battered at buckled doors. Water surged through ruptured compartments, swallowing machinery and snuffing out lights. In the magazine, a petty officer crawled through smoke to close a watertight hatch, sealing off a spreading fire. Knowing it meant cutting off his own escape, he did it anyway, teeth gritted, thinking only of the men above. On the hangar deck, another group braved the choking haze to roll live bombs away from flickering flames. Each second, a gamble against sudden oblivion. A wounded pilot, leg bleeding and flight suit torn, helped drag a comrade clear of a collapsing bulkhead, their uniforms smeared with blood and foam. Overhead, orders clashed, some yelling for evacuation, others to stand and fight the flames. In every corner of the ship, men made impossible choices: to risk the leap overboard or stay and fight for every inch of steel. The carrier listed harder, the deck slanting enough that carts rolled on their own, scattering tools and hope alike. But even as water filled the lower decks and explosions rocked the hull, pockets of courage flared brighter. Officers formed ad hoc teams to rescue the trapped. Signalmen stayed at their posts, tapping out messages even as the room filled with acrid smoke, trying to reach the fleet, or perhaps simply to bear witness. For every act of heroism, there was heartbreak, a message unfinished, a friend's hand slipping away in the smoke. Yet as the ship groaned and shuddered, and the ocean crept higher with each minute, no one surrendered. Hope refused to die. Against all odds, men still fought for their ship, for their brothers, for the legend they had believed would never end. But as alarms faded and the carrier's bow dipped ever lower, a grim realization set in. The line between survival and oblivion was vanishing. The moment of no return had arrived. Time seemed to slow as the carrier's fate became inevitable, a sensation both surreal and excruciating for those who remained aboard. The sea had claimed a hold on the great ship, its iron grip tightening with every passing moment. The deck sloped ever steeper, sending tools, crates, and wounded men sliding helplessly toward the starboard rail. All around, smoke curled in strange, hypnotic patterns, blurring the lines between sky and water, hope and despair. The last shreds of discipline held, but just barely. Officers moved through the chaos with haunted faces, issuing the order no one wanted to hear. Abandon ship. The words rippled down the corridors and across the battered decks, spoken in a dozen voices, each one edged with disbelief. Men paused, frozen for a heartbeat, some clutching personal tokens, others staring back at the spaces where they'd laughed and worked only hours before. There was a final, desperate rush to gather wounded, to break open life rafts, to help those whose courage still outweighed their fear. Explosions thundered deep below, muffled by layers of steel and water, each one a dull, fatal drumbeat. Ammunition stores, once the ship's promise of vengeance, now became her executioners, sending shocks through her frame and forcing crew to leap overboard in flurries of foam and terror. The water, once the ship's highway, now surged up through the lower decks, flooding machinery and swallowing dreams. Men jumped, some with silent prayers, others shouting names that vanished in the roar. Above it all, the imperial flag still snapped in the wind, a tattered symbol refusing to surrender until the very end. For a moment, the supercarrier seemed to resist the inevitable, her massive hull fighting the pull of the deep. But as water poured through the breaches, she gave a final, aching groan, and her bow dipped beneath the surface. From the water, survivors watched in silence as the ship's stern lifted, pointing skyward, then slid down in a long, slow arc, leaving behind only a patch of burning oil and scattered wreckage. In that shattering silence, hundreds bobbed in the cold Pacific, clutching debris and memories. The Invincible had become a ghost, her legend undone by a single unseen flaw. The men in the water tried to reconcile the image of what was with the reality of what had just happened. Some wept, others stared at the horizon, faces numb, as distant ships began the grim work of rescue. As the carrier's silhouette faded beneath the waves, the shock radiated far beyond those who saw it with their own eyes. Both navies, victor and vanquished, would feel the tremors of that loss for years to come. How could a single vulnerability doom the Empire's dream? The answer, and its lessons, would echo through every war room and every heart that survived the day the sea swallowed the legend whole. News of the supercarrier's loss hit Tokyo like a winter gale, first as a ripple of disbelief, then as a wave of grief and outrage. Admirals who had staked their reputations on her invincibility sat in stunned silence, replaying decisions, blaming fate, or quietly mourning men they'd sent to sea. Newspapers, once filled with triumphant headlines, now printed sober lists of the missing and lost. Families clung to hope for word of loved ones, scanning every bulletin for a miracle that would not come. Across the Pacific, Allied command erupted in cautious celebration. In quiet offices and bustling wardrooms, officers traded handshakes and silent nods, understanding that the victory had cost dearly, but meant even more. Strategists studied every detail, how intelligence, adaptation, and a single risky innovation had changed the course of a battle, and perhaps the war itself. Some acknowledged luck, others called it fate, but all knew that naval warfare had turned a corner. No ship, no matter how mighty, would ever again be considered truly unsinkable. Yet beneath the flags and the speeches, the human cost was inescapable. Survivors of the carrier's final hours struggled with wounds, memories, and questions that would linger for a lifetime. For some, rescue meant a second chance. For others, it was the beginning of a lifelong journey to make sense of what had been lost at sea. On both sides, there were stories of compassion. Enemy sailors pulled from the water, medics tending wounds regardless of the uniform. In the aftermath, both navies took hard lessons to heart. The Japanese, shaken from their faith in myth, began to scrutinize every design, every doctrine, no longer blinded by pride. The Allies, for all their victory, recognized the razor-thin margin between triumph and disaster. They knew that a single weapon, a single decision, could alter the fate of nations. Did the loss of one ship truly change the course of the Pacific War? In many ways, yes. The shockwaves rippled out, shaping future battles, forcing both sides to adapt and innovate in ways neither had foreseen. The price was paid in steel and sacrifice, in legends broken and new ones born. History would not forget the day the sea claimed a nation's pride, or the lessons carved in the silence that followed. Decades have passed, but the supercarrier's story still lingers in the salt and silence of the Pacific. Somewhere beneath restless waves, her wreckage rests, twisted steel and shattered dreams, slowly claimed by the sea. Divers and historians return year after year, seeking fragments of a lost era, a nameplate, a wheel, the ghostly outline of a deck where hope once soared and disaster struck. On distant shores, memorials rise where families gather to honor the fallen, their names etched in stone and memory. For veterans, the carrier remains more than a ship. It is a symbol of courage and ambition, of the thin line between triumph and tragedy. In classrooms and museums, new generations learn of the day when the unsinkable fell, and how that loss reshaped the course of war. Yet questions linger. What secrets still lie beneath the waves, waiting to be told? Each discovery, each story shared, brings the past a little closer and reminds us of the price of both arrogance and innovation. Let us remember the legend, honor the sacrifice, and never forget the lessons written in steel, water, and the hearts of those who were there. Share the legend. Let no lesson be forgotten.